Yeah, I told that today. I don't think last one. There's a guy playing. Yeah, I have been.
Yeah, I want to bring the girls.
There's Ben very drunk.
And I wasn't very drunk. I was kind of modestly drunk.
We're recording now, by the way.
That just, yeah, so now I'm at Emory for the rest of my career.
Supper last night, yeah?
So that's not a very good picture, but that's where we were last night. I love Milwaukee. I had no idea you could go to a place where they made their own Spam. And so it's this thing which a more educated person at the table this morning tells me was actually liver cheese, Leberkäse, with an egg and potato salad on it. So this is actually probably going to be a fairly short session, in part due to some of the people in the room who made it really hard to get any work done last night.
You are in possession of free will.
All that Ayn Rand crap. Sorry, there's another thing that's getting recorded. Okay, well we've got a few people here, many more people than I expected for this talk. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about using some open source tools for data warehousing and reporting. This is a project we've undertaken at Emory Law School. Emory's in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm the IT director there. The issue for us is, well, there's a couple of things, but basically for all law schools, we get data from a variety of source systems. We have our PeopleSoft ERP system that feeds us tons and tons of data. We also get data from ACES2, which is the admissions data. We get piles of data from random spreadsheets. We later on get data from Simplicity, which is our career services database. And what we were looking for was a way to integrate these piles of data in some sort of fairly replicatable, if that's a word, way, so that when I move to Milwaukee permanently, we can still use the data efficiently. Most of what I'm going to talk about today comes from an outstanding book. Open source, by the way, of course, continues to have the worst names ever. Pentaho, right? I don't know what that means. Pentaho. Just say it over and over again. It sounds like a curse word from another language, right? Pentaho. Anyway, it is. Well, it's the Spanish. Yeah. Anyway, so there's a book called Pentaho Solutions, Business Intelligence and Data Warehousing with Pentaho and MySQL, written by Roland Bowman and Jos van Dongen. If I'm sure I'm mangling their names. If you need to leave now, you've got everything you need from the talk. I mean, just write that down or go Google that or use Amazon or whatever. This is a fantastic book. And one of the things that we do a lot, at least it feels like we do a lot in law school, is pretend to be experts, especially law school IT. We pretend to be experts about a lot of things, and we try to stay, slightly ahead of whatever it is that our clients, our customers want from us. And that's sort of the way I feel about business intelligence. I am not an expert with regard to business intelligence. I'm a learner. I'm a newbie. And this book is just a tremendous, and it's actually a fun read. It is. It's just a tremendous resource. So use that book. Pentaho. Pentaho is a suite of programs, again, coming out of this open source tradition. One of the things that you'll notice if you start to work with Pentaho is not every program was written by the same programmer, and they don't all have the same interface quite, but they work together pretty well. There are three main aspects to the Pentaho suite, and I'm just throwing out things like open source, blah, blah, blah. What this means, of course, for anyone who might not be familiar with that term, and I just assume everyone is that you can download the software and install it yourself. Because it's written in Java, and I'm not a Java coder, I was never particularly a fan of Java, but what this means is that you can run Pentaho on your Windows box, you can run Pentaho on your Mac, and then you can do what we do and run it on Linux servers. So it's usable everywhere that you can run a database or everywhere that you can get to a database. Also, while the focus of this book and the focus of our efforts is on MySQL, one of the great things about Java's long history now is that, of course, there are connectors for any database you want to mess with. So if you've got access to Oracle, knock yourself out. I don't, and I don't know anything about Oracle, but you can use DB2 or Oracle or even MS SQL if you want to do that. So there are three primary tools that make up this suite. Kettle, another little geeky pun. It's an extract, transform, and load tool. So what Kettle does is it takes your nasty data that you got in CSV files or in Excel spreadsheets and transforms it into clean and beautiful data that you will then put into your database. It can load it into the database for you, and it includes things, it includes all sorts of neat tools. We'll talk about that. One of the things that's interesting about switching, well, I'll hold up on that for just a second. Pentaho Report Designer is a little bit like Crystal Reports, or I'm told it's a little bit like Crystal. I've actually never used Crystal, but I'm told it's the same sort of general idea. It's a graphical report designer. You start out with a database query, you drag and drop pieces of data onto the page, you've got some summary functions, you've got charting functions, you've got some other things. We'll look at that in a minute. And then the Pentaho BI server is actually kind of the star of the suite, but I'm not going to spend any time on it today. It gives your managers, your associate deans and deans, dashboards. It gives them one-click access to data. One of the funny things in this book, they talk about the one-click user, and they say these are also known as managers, which I think is exactly right. A lot of talking about that, a lot of the motivation for this project came when we hired a new associate dean for community engagement and student affairs or something along those lines. He's a very, very bright guy, very busy guy, who used to be general counsel at Delta Airlines before he retired and decided to come help us out. And I guess the IT structure at Delta is different than at the law school. And he figured we would have all of this already and was surprised that we didn't. And so that's part of the motivation behind some of these, some of the things that I'm going to talk about. Oh yeah, just a little bit of stuff. Soon I think IT, especially law school IT, is going to be out of the infrastructure business entirely. I mean, we're going to quit running servers. It won't be too terribly long, I think, before we quit running help desks. I wouldn't be surprised to see that function go away within the next few years. We should be thinking about how we're actually going to add value back to our law schools. And especially right now, given the current economic situation, IT can play a very strategic role at the law school if we sort of step up to the plate and volunteer. The problem is people often don't know what to ask us for. And a good example of that, Simplicity, our career services application, is actually very good. It is really very capable. And no one had, I think, really dived into Simplicity and really taken a look at what it could do for us at the law school. And that's something where we've gotten involved in that. And much as you hate to take on a new responsibility, I think we are in the process of adding some additional value to what the law school does. So anyway, a little thing. So currently, how do we do stuff? How do we manage data at the law school? Almost 100% Excel spreadsheets. We've got a business analyst who's very good. We have a CFO who trusts him implicitly. But that's a pretty fragile system. It's fragile because the data gets out of whack. It's fragile because there may be 10, 15, 20 versions of a particular spreadsheet wandering around. And it's also fragile because once in a great while, Sherman gets sick or has to go on vacation or all of those other things. And so that's really not viable for us in the long term. So one of our, the other thing he does these remarkable PowerPoint charts and graphs. A lot of them fed from the data in Excel. And so one of our goals is to eventually come up with auditable processes with regard to our data, with our data sources, and to create a read-only source of data within the law school, right? And that seems obvious, and I'm sure many of you already have that sort of thing, this sort of single source of truth with regard to your data at your law schools. But that's a goal for us. That's something that we're really not there yet. So data sources, as I mentioned before, we get loads and loads of data from PeopleSoft, grades, the unofficial transcripts. The unofficial transcripts are an interesting source of information because, of course, with the unofficial transcripts, you can also do things like sort out whether they were on law review because they get credit for that. And so it gives you, there's some opportunities there that we've taken advantage of with some of our reporting. We get ACES 2, tons and tons of data from LSAC. This will give you birth cities, states, countries. Obviously, it gives you your LSAT measures and your undergrad GPAs, undergrad schools, things like that. So we've got the input measures for our student population. And then with simplicity, we can measure things like engagement, participation in the career services offerings. And we also, of course, get that employment data that we're all closely monitoring these days. Then we have manually generated data, soft skills that the students might have, roles within the Student Bar Association, whether they were leaders of particular student organizations, that sort of thing. And that falls on a person to enter a bunch of data into a spreadsheet. So these are some of the data sources that we're using. Then we create things like this. Okay, we're not going to linger on that. But the idea being that this is where we wind up, that we have a table that has all the student information, has a bunch of their graduation information, and also has all of their grades. So we've got, I think, 8 years of data in the system now, something like that, which is about as far back as I can go with PeopleSoft. Because we are not yet part of the university's enterprise service bus, we get the data from PeopleSoft as CSV files and loaded in. We get most of this data as CSV and loaded in. Okay, if you want to explore Pentaho, you go to community.pentaho.com and download it. These are large applications. They're big files. The setup is not terribly difficult, but I'm not going to spend time on that today. But if any of you would get interested in this, interested enough in it to download it and play with it, if you run into any issues at all, just let me know, and I'll be glad to walk you through some of the back-end configuration and setup. All right, so we'll get started here. I'm gonna show you what Kettle looks like, or PDI, or Pentaho Data Integration. It has multiple names. We're gonna play. Ken Hirsch isn't here, but whenever I throw up any data that even remotely looks like a real student, Ken dresses me down, preferably in public, to remind me that I shouldn't be displaying that data even among friends. So we are using data from fakenamegenerator.com. This is another takeaway from this thing. You can get up to 50,000 fake names with reasonable names and email addresses and credit card numbers. They're all fake. I'm told they're all fake. All I know is they don't work. But you can get big piles of data to play with, and so I've taken a big pile of data, and that's what we're going to be playing with today. If I can do this right, bring it back to PDI. So, are there any questions at this point so far? This is all kind of preparatory material. Yes, ma'am.
The data from ACES 2.
Mm-hmm.
You get that from ACES 2 as a hosted, or you get it from your own school?
It's provided to me by Arnita Howard, who is our superstar in our admissions department. We don't host our own instance of LSAC's thing. I mean, it's out in the cloud. Right. And so we get that data as spreadsheets or CSV files. I have access to all of these data sources now. So occasionally I will do that. I'm trying to build in processes where I go to the owner of the data and I ask them for the data so that we are all agreed on where the data comes from and who gave it to whom when, things like that. But that's where it comes from. So what you're looking at now is Spoon, which is yet another name for kettle, which is still another name for PDI, or Pentaho Data Integration. So like some multi-named god. It just, the guy kept coming up with new names for it. So the interesting thing about this, some of you might be looking at this and you're going, well, that's cool. You've got a flow chart, right? Well, this isn't the flow chart. This is the transformation. This is the thing that is going to operate on the data. And it's a very different approach if, like me, you're used to writing things that read a line of data in, loop over the line, and move it somewhere, right? This is very different. This is a picture of your data, a picture of the process that it's going to do something with. So let me show you how that works. This is actually what just about all of my transformations look like. This general sort of template here. And this is very simplified. But we start out with a step. These are all called steps. And let me close this and step back a second. Let's go to design and see if we can show you everything. The way this works is you have steps. The steps are available to you. You connect the steps together to form a chain that processes your data from input to output. This is very, I think harder for me than for non-programmers that I show this to. And they're like, oh, nice, right? For me, this seems like kind of odd, but okay. So we have inputs, and look at some of the inputs that you've got. You can read access tables, CSV tables. You can create a data grid for someone to manually input some data on the fly for you. You've got Excel, so you can natively read Excel files. You can read XLS and XLSX. Excel files, if you want to read files off a file share somewhere, for example. And then you've got lots of other things. You can generate random values, generate rows, get data from XML. Tons and tons of stuff, including some things that are a little bit more unusual. LDAP, for example. I could potentially hit up our AD system for data. And I haven't had a need to do that yet because I wrote some stuff in Python that does that a long time ago. But I could do it. Then you have a set of output steps. And the output steps, you can create Excel files, create access tables, create SQL tables, things like that. And then the meat of the whole thing, and they're closely aligned with Salesforce. So we don't use Salesforce, but there's more and more buzz around our law school, at least, about looking into a heavy-duty CRM solution. And I don't know whether you all have already started to implement something like that, but that seems to be something we're going to be looking into in a lot more detail. Okay, input, output, and transforms. So transforms can do things like add sequences, like a record ID, for example, to your data, replace things, concatenate things, move stuff around, little chunks of functionality. And if you can't find the particular thing that you're interested in, they use JavaScript as their glue language. Again, that wouldn't have been my first choice, but I love that they've done this because there are a lot of people who do JavaScript and are not intimidated by JavaScript. So it's very cool. And then they've got some utility functions and a bunch of others. It just goes on and on and on. So let's go ahead and get into this. I'm going to ignore this guy sitting out here for just a second. All right? Don't look at that one. We drag a step, and in this case, I just dragged the CSV step over onto the palette. And then you connect it to the next step, and you do some definitions and so on. I'm going to delete this guy because I don't need him. Yes. And let's look at what's actually in this. So, I've browsed for a file name. I've told it to preview the data. It pulls up, all of these names are fake. Did I say that? Okay. It pulls up the data. And allows you to see it so that you know what you're getting. And it's sitting there. And about here, I said, wow, I really like this tool. Because I usually, like I say, I usually write this stuff. Now, I've gone ahead and set some lengths. It will auto-guess lengths of field names for you, but what's the problem with that? It will inevitably set the length of the field name a little short. And then it will crash, and you'll get red things later. So you go back and you can manually set the name, or set the lengths of the field names. You can see that it's also doing typing. What's one of the biggest issues with Excel? There are no types. There are no types in Excel. And so one of the things that we do is whether we were parsing Excel or text files, we would set the types here. So that data comes in via this step, and this is just to show you a couple of transforms. And again, this is a very small example, just to give you a feel for what the system looks like. We want to add a record ID. I have a database. It is a live database, by the way. I mean, there's a local MySQL database running on this MacBook, so you can see that. But what I wanted to do was add an auto-incrementing integer that will later be the record ID for this data, blah. So we set that up. And here you can see my terribly bad JavaScript skills. You get data in, and let's say it's got raw LSAT scores. And you want to do some sort of very basic analysis on the data just to kind of kick off your thoughts about what you're going to do with it later, or perhaps to categorize it into different tables or do other things. Some of the stuff you can do with Pentaho is really kind of amazing. You can send emails directly out of the system, for example. So perhaps if we wanted to send an email out with everyone who had an LSAT above 175, we might choose to do that. But I just wrote this script that categorizes LSAT scores, and this is all made up, and no, that doesn't reflect low and medium and high and all of that, but it's just an example of the kind of processing you can do. The input fields that you get are the fields in that stream of data, right? And you have them available then as JavaScript variables. Then they come back out. Down here is a field with it's a string. And we wind up with something called LSAT category. So that's an example of, or those are examples of two transforms. We can add the record ID, group the LSAT based on score, and we're going to create a data table from that. So this is another step that creates data tables. I don't think, since I haven't made any changes to it, this is not going to be very exciting. Yeah, I'll show you this in just a second. One of the things that's interesting about this system is that it can be a real hand holder if you're not comfortable with SQL syntax. It will try to create the SQL for you to create the table. And it's actually very helpful if this is not something that you do every day. So you click the SQL button, and if there's any SQL required, it looks at the existing database schema, looks at your transformations, and says, okay, in order to make these consistent, you need to do blah. Because I was just fiddling with that JavaScript transform, it thought to itself, incorrectly, but it thought to itself, oh, I bet he needs a tiny text field, LSAT underscore category. I don't. I need a field about 10 characters across. But it's trying to be helpful. And this is actually also really neat. So it's creating the database table for us. And you can run this, and we will. One of the things that was in there, by the way, let me go back. The checkbox, the truncate table checkbox. So the very first thing it's going to do is dump all of the data out of the database, load the data back into the database, and we go on from there. Okay? Again, if one of your goals is to create a process where you can say with absolute certainty, my data is clean. I got this spreadsheet from there, I got that spreadsheet from there, I got this thing from you, and we fed it all into this database on this date, and here's our result set. It's, it's nice to be able to do that sort of thing here. The other thing you can do is you can make sticky notes. You can drag things around on the table the way that you might, however you might want to do that. We can do things like this. And create a text file output. Okay. If there are any errors in my JavaScript, if there are any errors in the records coming to the JavaScript step, they will now be output to a text file. And I'm cutting out a little bit of detail there because I would have to determine how the errors were set, that kind of thing. I love stuff like this. This becomes kind of addictive. And for the technically inclined, does anyone recognize what this whole IDE is built on top of? Little quiz. It is. And I was blown away. I was like, you can do this with Eclipse? But apparently there are all of these UML to code generators that are also in the Eclipse world. And I think they took a lot of inspiration from that.
IBM built Eclipse to deal with everything that they do.
It works. Yeah, it works. It works surprisingly well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this. And yes, delete. It deletes the hop. These are called hops. You create hops by holding down the Shift key. All right, so I'm going to show you this other thing. Everything in Kettle or PDI or Spoon happens sequentially. If it's connected sequentially, it actually executes in parallel. I'm not going to dwell on that, but it's pretty cool. It allows it to deal with really large sets of data, except for the very first step, which can be detached and will always run before everything else runs. And so this will look really familiar to people who do SQL. So I have just an SQL script that kicks everything off, that creates the table. The way that I normally work in Kettle is I allow Kettle to suggest the table creation step to me, down in that last one that I was showing you before. I then tweak it, put it in this step at the beginning, which allows me to do things like create an index or do this sort of stuff where I drop the table if it exists, and things that are slightly beyond what the very basic tool does. So we click Run. It may or may not work. Again, I blame the beer. Click OK. So it's saving a copy of the transformation, and then it's going to actually try to run it. The other thing that might have is lurking here is that all of these are just XML files that can be run from the that can be run from the command line. So they can be scripted and scheduled, and you can do all sorts of other things with them. That did not, this always happens when you do a live demo, did not do what I wanted. There we go. All right. So I wanted to show you an error. I mentioned the red before. Okay. Now, what's happened here, you get the typically wordy Java errors where it's complaining about this table, right? It says this table doesn't exist. And that actually is a unintended consequence of the way this executed. If I run it again, it'll do the right thing. But one of the things I like about this system is you get lots of feedback. And when I first started using it, I found it like excessively picky about things, but it is very helpful. So you get lots of feedback if you've got issues. You've also got step metrics and things like that. We have about 61,000 records in our main grades table now, which is nothing compared to what some of y'all do, the size of some of the data sets that you all deal with. But it is fun to watch this tear through the data. I mean, it works it runs very quickly. So we're going to close that, and I'm going to show you one other thing, and then we're going to leave this part of this. The transformations themselves can be stored in a database. And this is a set of, this is a view onto our database of transformations at Emory. And so you can see sort of some more complicated transformations. If we do the original create, let me do something that's not. I can do something like this. This is pulling from a MySQL database located on a virtual machine back at Emory. And hopefully there we are. All right. So this is a slightly more complicated set of transformations, but it's not hugely so. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. But I love the idea that when you're working with a tool like this, it's easy enough to write these little Post-it notes so that when you do come back to it 6 months later, you've at least got some idea of what you were doing. And because of a lack of identifiers, we do a lot of things where we sort out first names and last names and use that as a way to guess at the name of the student, and then we go back and manually match people up. So you can see a lot of that sort of thing. What we're doing here is filtering based on whether or not a field from ACES says second deposit paid. And if it says second deposit paid, chances are they're coming to Emory, and we look at them differently. We treat that data differently than we do the other. So that's an example of a bigger transformation. And then for an example of where this becomes really powerful, we'll look at jobs. Jobs allow you to string transformations together. So as you can see, there's this whole building block concept with this tool. And this is a job that uses 4 or 5 transformations to populate our student data tables. So each one of these is a separate transformation. So there are 5 transformations. So we're creating the data tables. We load it with raw data. We update all of the data based on stuff that we get out of ACES 2, so that we get more demographic data into the database. Match up some net IDs, our local identifier, and then we add markers to the database to indicate things like participation and other things in various activities. And I think that's enough about that. All right. So at this point, does anybody have any questions? Just get the book. Okay. We'll leave data integration and see if I can switch back to world's ugliest keynote slides. All right, so this is what we've been looking at. Next thing, and I don't think I'm going to spend very much time on this at all. I may just, I think I've got a link in here to it. Data Cleaner is a tool for analyzing the data that you get, and it does, it provides you with all sorts of analysis statistics that you can then use when you're configuring your databases. One of the things that happens is that people lie to you about their data all the time. Okay, the XYZ field is numeric. Well, it's numeric except for where we put exception in letters, you know, or whatever. And you discover these things usually when you're on a deadline later. And so what's really nice is to use something like, see, now I'm wanting to show it off. It's also the slickest Java app I've ever seen. We'll come back to it if we have time. But it's got a really cool GUI. What you can do, and again, this is all made up data, but what you can do with it is, I made a slide. Do this kind of thing. How many rows, how many nulls, how many bits of your data are entirely uppercase, lowercase, what's the maximum length, what's the shortest length, average. You can do top 10 and bottom 10 if you're looking at values, things like that. It gives you quick insight into your data. And it's EO Objects Data Cleaner. It's another open source Java tool, has a slightly unusual user interface, but it's very pretty. It's one of the nicest looking Java applications I've seen. And it can read from CSV from a variety of databases and also from Excel. So it's a great tool if you're trying to get a quick overview of your data, or if you're trying to clean up data so that you can begin setting up your data tables, because you've realized you really don't want every single character field in the database to be 255 characters long. So you take sort of the information you glean from that, and you can run it through this. Since maximum number of characters is usually the thing that you care about, I'm sure that a lot of you have already done this in Excel. I mean, you can do it in Excel, right? You just take the max of the length. But it's a really good tool. The other one that I do actually want to spend a bit of time on is a Canadian tool, yay, Canada, called SQL Power Architect. And it's a database agnostic SQL tool, sort of a Swiss Army knife for doing database things that have to do with SQL. And it allows you to do things like forward engineer and reverse engineer databases from a variety of manufacturers, and then convert or generate the data definitions for whatever database you're moving to. So, for example, if you're moving from MS SQL to MySQL, yes, do it. You might use SQL Power to discover where there are going to be issues with doing that. You can also compare different databases to see where the differences are for when you didn't document all those data tables you created and you want to see what you did. You can do that sort of thing. You can copy data directly from one database to another database, and they can be distinct in different kinds of databases. Where I wind up using it most of the time is at this, again, like most of the stuff I'm doing, this is very, very basic. Close. This is, by the way, a list of all of the database connections that I've defined just so you can get a sense of the kinds of stuff you wind up doing with all of these tools. You're always configuring a connection string to a database somewhere, and this is sort of what it looks like, and it's running the connection to my local database. The Power Architect people are fairly closely connected to Pentaho, so it's a good tool for working with Pentaho. But anyway, let me show you the way that I primarily use it is like this, which is pretty dopey, actually. I was just showing you those connections. I choose a connection. Now I'm connected to a database. And for this demo, I created something here. And we'll call it, CALI applicants. All right, well, let's make that a little bigger so you can see it. So, again, I think, and this is my ignorance of what it's like in the Microsoft world because I'm not there. But I think that perhaps Microsoft folks would look at this and go, yeah, we've had this always. Nice GUI view on a database. I didn't know that. I've always used MySQL on the command line. So to me, this is great. This is a time saver, and it's great for my team. If I've got people who are not doing SQL stuff very often, this is very helpful. Let me show you how you would build a query. Drag the name of the table over, and let's say that we were doing this sort of thing. It's kind of a dopey query, but especially since I just drag that over. Select from. Nice. Because I nuked the database in the earlier demonstration there when I threw up those errors. So you get no data out. Imagine, if you will, that there was a grid of data displayed down here. It's a good tool for doing basic database queries, and I find myself using it all the time. This is not a sophisticated use of this tool, but it's it is very useful. So SQL Power Architect, another good tool in this sort of toolkit. Now, see, that's kind of making me want to redo that job. Launch. Yes. We want to run. Okay. So that time, no red. Okay, I created my database, and it loaded all of that data. And now let's execute this query again. Ta-da! These are all made up. What I was playing with is 4,000 records, and I just graphed it on some fake LSAC scores and undergrad GPAs. And so we can play around with this data. You can do things like this, doing quick sorts in the database. Let me go all the way back up to the top. You can also select all of the records and save them out as CSV or as HTML. So again, a really useful tool. SQL Power Architect, playing with queries, quick query, graphical representations, PDI, Report Designer. So this is the last thing that I'm going to talk about today. And just know that the BI server, the BI server does provide this dashboarding capability and sort of in a fancy web-driven interface. What we were interested in, again for this person who was the primary driver on this project, he wanted to see everything about a student gathered together in one place, preferably on one page. And he wanted to use that to prep for meetings with the students. And then he really focuses on data in that way, person by person by person. This is not a traditional use of business intelligence. Business intelligence generally is usually understood to mean divining trends about your data by looking at masses of data and going back to it. So it's not that I'm unaware of that, it's that the particular need in this case was for this sort of focus. And so I'll pull up one of those reports so you can see what we wind up generating. Again, ever mindful of Ken Hirsch. What you can do with this reporting tool, and it's hard to get a fairly dense report onto a little screen like this, so I apologize. But we're pulling data from all of those sources that we mentioned earlier in order to generate this one-page summary of the student's performance. And so this is something that is subjective and manual and is tracked by our career services people. Has to do with sort of their evaluation of the relationship with their student. This comes through financial aid data that we get through PeopleSoft. This thing with law school engagement, where we're doing journals, moot and mock court, clinics, field placement, all of that comes from scraping the transcript, the unofficial transcript, which is really just a list of grades and course names out of PeopleSoft. And so you can scrape that and divine at least some information about what the student did. This is whether or not they obtained a certificate. There would be some data if this particular person had. Again, these are soft things that are tracked in a separate database and brought into this. This stuff all comes through Simplicity, and we've got some salary information and where they wound up and that sort of thing. So it's pulling all of that together. It generates a 490-page PDF. This is the second page. Remember, one of our requirements was to get this down to one page, and we can't quite get that far. But the second page of the report is the unofficial transcript, if you will. It's everything they've taken, and there is a column for grade that's not on this sheet. But so that would give the person meeting with the student a good snapshot overview of what the student has done in law school, as well as what inputs we had to work with. So let's look at that and how you do that. And again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because I think any of you that have worked with a GUI report designer will find this familiar. It's another great thing about open source are the icons they choose to brand themselves. That's data integration because the yellow goes that way. That's the report designer because the yellow goes that way. I don't know why they did that. So I've only got 8 gigs of RAM in this machine, and this is all Java. It takes it a second to load. Sorry, I should have fired it up earlier. So are there any questions so far? Have you all got, I'm sure that everyone has their own solutions to this set of problems. Are there tools that you use that other people should know about? Okay.
Does central IT use this, or does the administration use PeopleSoft?
Okay. I'm actually kind of tickled about that. No, they don't use this. But the School of Public Health has now adopted Pentaho after they came over to do we did a sort of a demo for them, and they were pleased enough with it to start using it. And they're still very much in pilot mode. So that I'm glad about. The price was right. Now, there's an interesting thing about that. And my views about spending money, I'm trying to change them. I have been really reluctant to spend money on anything that I could get for free. The Pentaho folks have actually met with us, and we've signed a consulting agreement with them. I should have mentioned that earlier, and thanks for reminding me. We actually are spending real money with Pentaho. The interesting thing about it, because we didn't know how long we're going to use this tool, or whether, as I hope, the university will adopt it and step up and start paying for the enterprise version. So we just signed a consulting agreement, not a licensing deal for the commercial version of the software. Like a lot of other large open source projects these days, there's a community edition of Pentaho, and then there's the enterprise edition. They're essentially the same code base, but you have assurances with regard to patches and support and things like that on the enterprise level that you don't get with the community version. All right, and again, let me show you a little bit what we're doing. So that report that you saw earlier looks like this when you're creating it. There's a subreport here that actually calculates or retrieves rather, the students' GPAs for each term that they were at the law school. So this is a report made up of two reports. There's a main report and a subreport. The way that this works is you drag and drop bits of data onto the canvas as you move things around. Right? They will highlight to show you when you're overlapping some other data element. It's going to mess up your report. You can group things. That's actually a grouping of a whole bunch of separate data fields in one block. And it's a pretty comfortable environment to work in. I won't say that this is the most user-friendly tool I've ever seen, but it's not bad, especially for what I'm used to. So here, for example, you see date of birth. Date of birth is a message field. There are things that I can change about it that are style. Tons and tons of things. People did not adopt the Apple ethos. Everything's changeable. And then there are attributes that I can change, such as the value of the field, the name of the field, which is really handy when you have 30 message fields over here, and you're trying to remember what you're editing, what you're working on. But that's how you do that. And then you can do formulas. And so you can affect the data, or the display of the data, by using a formula, and they use the open formula language from OpenOffice, which is like the Excel formula language, very similar to that. And so we do some of those. For example, here, let me click on this. There's a numeric field, don't ask me why, as to whether they participated in a program called Tiger. And so if Tiger is greater than 0, I want to display that as Tiger. And if it's not greater than 0, I want it to be null. I don't want to show 1 or 0 or 3 or whatever to the person reading the report. So this is how that's what the formula language looks like. And then the other question might be, how did we get the data in here? Now, is there anybody in the room who actually works sort of full-time as a DBA? Good. No one. This is ugly. This is really ugly. We'll do students by last name. Yeah, let's edit this query, shall we? You want to edit. It takes it a second to pull it up. Because I can't give you the full glorious vision of this query in this little window.
So it's generating this query, or
I did this. But I'll show you how as soon as we call up yet another very slow Java plugin. There is an SQL a GUI for SQL called SQL Leonardo, which is a Java project. And one of the great things about doing all of this stuff in Java is they're able to leverage all this other work out there in this very large Java ecosphere. Oh, no. I really want to see this. Maybe it's in another window. Oh, okay. Anyway, and SQL Leonardo is a graphical query editor. I think the issue here is that it's trying to get back to my database at home to verify that it can run the query. And I think that's what's kind of hanging it up a bit. When you go, let me go back to this for a second. This, and I know you can't read, well, you can sort of read it. Some of you are younger than me. This is actually the query creator. This is SQL Leonardo. So what you do is you drag the tables over onto this palette. You check the fields that you want to make available to your report, and you connect them together. You can see that something called impl ID seems to be really important to us. And so you drag impl ID over here to impl ID to connect the grade reports back to the demographic information about the student. And you do that within the query editor in the report generator. So to answer your question, Rich, I tweaked the query because there's some things with inner joins and outer joins that it does, but I wound up doing that. But it gives you such a nice head start. I mean, it gives you a huge head start. And I wish I could demo it for you. So let's see. And no, I cannot. Okay, so I've broken something. But here is the query. It goes on and on and on and on. And once again, I just want to point out that this is not what someone like you who reads this book would do. In a redesigned data layout, we would be using a very simple query. Most of the data would already be denormalized and would be stuffed into one giant table and pre-prepared. And this would make report generation much faster, if that makes sense. And one of the nice things that these guys do is they go through explaining the difference between dimension and fact tables and how you build schemas for data warehouses. And I think that goes way beyond Pentaho. It's just a good primer on that kind of design. I have lots of bad habits, old habits, and I just wanted to make this report, so that's how I did it. And we will eventually make this better.
I don't think I've ever done a query without any joins in it.
Yeah, I know.
You've never seen any John Bear SQL.
I'm not sure that was a compliment. You're saying my... Okay. All right. We are done. Those are the things that I wanted to talk about. I would urge you to take a look at the book, and then you can use that with other kinds of software. It doesn't necessarily have to be this. This set of tools has been really useful for us. Thank you so much for your attention on a really early Saturday morning.